Good morning and welcome to Name That Government, the game show where you will be asked to figure out which government type the people choose in order to meet the four purposes, such as maintain social order, provide public goods and services, maintain a national security, and making economic decisions. Every society, every state has to choose the type of government that's going to meet those purposes. We could have a government that is ruled by many, such as a democracy, ruled by one, such as a dictatorship, ruled by few, an oligarchy, or ruled by none, which would be anarchy. So what we're going to do today is, as you fill out the chart, you're going to look at the different types of government. We will be using this information in class to play some games and learn the different types of government. So we're going to start with anarchy. Okay? Anarchy is actually the complete absence of government. Characteristics could include chaos, any government control, lawlessness. During the French Revolution, you saw anarchy going on. People were being guillotined right and left. In Somalia during the 90s, it was going on. Then you could see that I have Syria. Anarchy is has some unique characteristics in that it is usually that which is seen right before government does come in and take over. And that first form of government is most often a dictatorship, because dictatorships are the easiest to control. The next government is also something that we don't see very much of, and that is the unitary form of government. Now remember, if I go too fast, at any point you can hit pause. So just remember, use your pause button. So a unitary government is a government in which all of the key powers are given to the state. It's sometimes easiest to talk about it in terms of what are examples. In ancient Greece, if you remember from studying ancient history, there were city-states called Sparta and not Athens. Sparta, and I can't remember the other one, and they were city-states. That would be an example of a unitary government. Unitary governments can't control large areas, so usually they are in a smaller, like a state or a local entities. But it is where all of the power is held centrally and locally. And there are no modern examples today. So every country would be an example, a non-example of unitary government. I have kind of a picture here that might help you visualize it. It's where the government controls everything, controls all of the people, controls all of the goods and services. If you think about the four purposes, the government does it all. And that's a really hard thing to control. We're going to skip down to federal government. Okay? The definition of a federal government is where the powers are shared between a central and a lower government. For example, in the United States, our government shares its powers between the state and federal government. In the area of education, for example, we have the Department of Ed at the federal level, Washington, D.C., but then we also have schools at the local level that have to carry out rules and regulations that are set out by the state and also by the federal government. So, for example, Iowa does not have any statewide test you have to take to graduate from high school. But whereas in Minnesota, they do. That's an example of that. Iowa has a state law. Minnesota has a state law that's local control or lower government control, whereas we still have to follow the rules that are set out by the Department of Ed. What are the characteristics? It's the idea is that there's two levels of sovereignty shared. Think of it in the idea of a waltz. Excuse me. This waltz is where we figured out how to share power. Look at the arrows going up and down between the two types of government. This was seen first in the United States. It's a very powerful form of government. So please put a star out into the margin to indicate that this is a form of government that the United States has. Some governments that don't have that, China and Cuba and Nazi Germany. Notice that those are countries that are controlled by one entity at the top. So we have federal government. So what is a confederacy, where you see the word federal in it? Okay, well, we probably remember the Confederacy because the South shall rise again. And that's, of course, what a confederacy is. A confederacy is a loose union of independent states. Notice that the states, the word state, is a little s, which means that they are all types of countries that have agreed to come together. So one example, you might call it a league, you might call it an alliance, but these are where the states are supreme and that they have the four characteristics of a state: population, territory, sovereignty, and government. Some examples, like I said, were the Confederate States of America, the Articles of Confederation, which was the United States' very first form of government, and some people might say that the United Nations is. But I kind of disagree because the United Nations doesn't have sovereignty. So really, like unitary governments, there are no modern examples. Okay? No modern examples of confederacy. A picture graph that you might have is look at how the states, which are represented by circles, they choose what power they're going to share with the arrow and what powers they are not going to share. Okay? The last government that we're going to talk about on this slide is the constitutional one, which you should be familiar with already because of the terms that you did. Please, no laughing at my pictures. Even I want to laugh. This is a government that is limited by a written or an unwritten constitution. And we know that written is like the United States, unwritten is like Great Britain. But because it's limited, it is still an example of a constitutional government. Whereas even though China has a constitution, that constitution doesn't put any limits on its government. Therefore, it is not a constitutional government. What are the characteristics of a constitutional government? Well, they are oftentimes democracies, a republic, and monarchies, constitutional monarchies. So again, like federal, you need to put a star out in the margin to indicate that the United States is also a constitutional government. Okay? So we're going to go to another slide here, and we're going to talk about some of the other types of democracy. Democracy, anarchy, you can see dictatorship and monarchy. So the first one we're going to talk about is what is called an autocracy. Okay? An autocracy is where the power is held by a small number of people. Okay? For example, in a dictatorship, that power is acquired through force, whereas in a monarchy, that power is acquired through inheritance. So again, an autocracy is where the power is held by a single individual. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my computer here. Let's try again. The power is held by a single individual. Okay? Sometimes a small group, but let's just kind of keep it straight in our minds, by a single individual. And how that power is given is what determines whether it's a dictatorship or a monarchy. Okay? So the monarchy would gather power through force or the military. So for example, if England was an autocratic monarchy, Prince Charles would grab his power by killing his mother, right? Which, all sons seem to want to do that sometimes. And absolute monarchy is a monarchy with no limits. A constitutional monarchy is an example of a monarchy that is given by a constitution. So examples of a dictatorship, of course, would be Hitler, Stalin, Hussein, and Castro. In a monarchy, we have two different kinds of examples. We have Saudi Arabia, which is an absolute monarchy, and Sweden and Great Britain, which are called constitutional monarchies. So there are two different kinds of monarchies that exist in the world today. Okay? The last government that I kind of want to talk about, or two, I guess there's two I want to hit, is the next one is called an oligarchy. Okay? An oligarchy is a government by committee. That is the definition. Government by committee. And its characteristics is its power is usually held through force and intimidation. Okay? So it might be done through a political party like the Communist Party, the Nazi Party, the Red Party. That's what that blank means. Those are the people that are usually seen as oligarchy. So when you're seeing the word committee, then that is usually an oligarchy. So what kind of examples do we have? China and North Korea. Now, I'm going to caution you about North Korea because North Korea is often seen as a dictatorship, but the Communist Party controls North Korea. But Kim Jong-il is the dictator of it. So North Korea is kind of a mutation of two, but that mutation still means that there's no civil liberties or rights for its people. Okay? The last government that I want to talk about today is the government called a theocracy. Let me move that a minute here. A theocracy is a type of government which a god or a deity is the supreme civil ruler. Okay? That means that God's laws are also seen and interpreted by ecclesiastical authorities. What a fancy word, ecclesiastical authorities, which means priests, reverends, clerics, imams from Islam. Okay, so some characteristics might be that their religious texts, like their Bible, the Quran, the Torah, are legally binding. So if you break God's law, you're breaking also man's law. Okay, so we know in the United States, if you have an affair with someone, you are breaking, in reference, God's law, but you might not necessarily be arrested for it. Whereas if you were in an Islamic country and you broke the Quran, you might indeed be breaking man's law as well. The religious leaders are oftentimes seen as the political leaders, and the judges are bound by the laws that are of the religion. Some examples would be that we started out as a theocracy in this country. Most Islamic nations are theocracies, such as Syria and Iran. Israel could almost be seen as a theocracy. However, some people believe that they are a constitutional republic as well. But religion plays a strong part in Israel. Okay. Well, that's all we're going to have for today, because we're going to take a different video, not necessarily a longer video, to talk about presidential democracies. So, can you name that government?